"You're nothing but a burden on this family," my mother-in-law announced, her voice cutting through the dinner conversation like a blade. "Marcus deserves so much better than someone who can't even contribute to household expenses." The entire table went silent, 20 pairs of eyes watching as she delivered what she thought was my final humiliation. Then the sound of helicopter blades began echoing outside, growing louder and louder, until the crystal chandelier above us started to tremble. My father-in-law's face went white as he peered through the window. Is that a private jet landing on our lawn?" Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I never wanted to go to the Henderson family dinner. That's the honest truth. Every month, Marcus's family gathered at his parents' sprawling estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, for what they called family bonding time. What it really was 2 hours of passive-aggressive comments disguised as concern, backhanded compliments wrapped in fake smiles, and constant reminders that I didn't belong in their world of old money and social connections. But I went anyway. I went because Marcus asked me to, because he still believed his family would eventually accept me. I went because I loved my husband, even when loving him meant enduring his mother's pointed questions about my little craft business and his father's lectures about fiscal responsibility. I went because somewhere deep inside, I still hoped that maybe this time would be different. The October evening was crisp as we pulled up the circular driveway in Marcus's modest Honda Civic. The house loomed before us, a testament to generational wealth with its perfectly manicured gardens and imposing columns. Cars worth more than most people's annual salaries lined the driveway. BMWs, Mercedes, a Porsche that belonged to Marcus's younger brother Trevor. Our car looked like it belonged in the staff parking area. I adjusted my simple black dress, the nicest one I owned, and took a deep breath. Marcus reached over and squeezed my hand. "You look beautiful, Sarah," he said, his voice gentle but tinged with the same anxiety I felt. "Just be yourself tonight, okay? Be myself." If only it were that simple. The version of myself I'd become around the Henderson family was quiet, apologetic, constantly trying to prove I was worthy of their son's love. It wasn't who I really was, but it was who I thought I needed to be to survive these monthly ordeals. Marcus and I had met 3 years ago at a coffee shop near NYU, where he was finishing his master's degree in social work. I was there working on my laptop, managing customer orders for my handmade jewelry business. He spilled coffee on my notebook, apologized profusely, and somehow we ended up talking for 4 hours about everything and nothing. He was kind, genuine, and refreshingly unimpressed by material things. He drove a used car, lived in a small apartment, and chose his career based on passion rather than profit. What I didn't know then was that Marcus Henderson came from money. Serious money. His grandfather had founded Henderson Industries, a manufacturing empire that had made the family extraordinarily wealthy. But Marcus had walked away from all of it, choosing to work with underprivileged youth instead of taking his expected place in the family business. His parents saw this as a temporary rebellion, a phase he'd eventually outgrow. They saw me as the reason he was wasting his potential. Eleanor Henderson, Marcus's mother, was a woman who wore her disappointment like expensive jewelry. She had perfectly coiffed silver hair, designer clothes that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and a smile that never reached her eyes when she looked at me. She spoke in the kind of refined accent that came from private schools and country clubs, and she had a talent for making every conversation feel like a job interview I was failing. Richard Henderson, Marcus's father, was equally imposing but in a different way. He was a man who measured worth in dollars and cents, who believed that success was the only metric that mattered. He'd built upon his father's legacy, expanding Henderson Industries into international markets. To him, I wasn't just unsuitable for his son. I was incomprehensible. How could someone choose to make jewelry by hand when they could have a real career? How could someone be content with financial uncertainty when security was available? The truth was, my little craft business wasn't as small as they thought. But they'd never asked the right questions, and I'd never volunteered the information. When they asked what I did for work, I'd simply say I made jewelry. When they asked about my income, I'd deflect or give vague answers about getting by. It wasn't entirely dishonest, but it wasn't the whole truth either. 3 years ago, when Marcus and I first started dating, my business was indeed small. I was making handcrafted pieces and selling them at local markets and through a basic website. I was passionate about my work, but I was barely breaking even. The Hendersons' assessment of my financial situation had been accurate then. What they didn't know was how dramatically things had changed. 2 years ago, a celebrity had worn one of my pieces to a red carpet event. The photo went viral, orders flooded in, and suddenly, my little handmade jewelry business exploded into something much bigger. I'd been strategic about the growth, reinvesting, profits, hiring skilled artisans, and expanding into luxury markets. What had started as a one-woman operation had become a multi-million-dollar company with international clients and exclusive partnerships with high-end retailers. But I'd kept this success quiet, not because I was ashamed of it, but because I'd wanted to see who Marcus really was without the influence of money. I'd grown up watching relationships crumble under the weight of financial expectations and gold-digging accusations. I wanted to be loved for who I was, not what I had. And Marcus had proven that he could love me when he thought I had nothing, which made me love him even more. The other reason I'd kept quiet was more complicated. Part of me had wanted to see how long the Henderson family would continue to underestimate me. Every dismissive comment, every condescending question, every reminder of my supposed inadequacy had been filed away in my memory. I wasn't plotting revenge exactly, but I wasn't going to tolerate their treatment forever either. As we walked toward the house that evening, I thought about the conversation I'd had with my business partner and best friend Maya earlier that day. She'd been urging me to tell Marcus the truth about the company's success for months. "Sarah, this is getting ridiculous," she'd said over lunch. "You're worth more than his entire family combined at this point, and they're treating you like you're some kind of charity case. When are you going to stop pretending to be poor?" "I'm not pretending to be poor," I'd argued. "I'm just not flaunting my wealth." "There's a difference between not flaunting and actively hiding," Maya had countered. "And what about Marcus? Don't you think he deserves to know that his wife is a successful entrepreneur? That the woman he married isn't the struggling artist? His family thinks she is?" She was right, of course. The secret had grown larger than I'd intended, and it was starting to feel dishonest rather than protective. But I'd been afraid that revealing the truth would change everything. Would Marcus still love me if he knew I'd been hiding such a significant part of my life? Would his family's treatment of me change? And would that change be genuine or just opportunistic? The front door of the Henderson mansion opened before we could ring the bell. Eleanor Henderson stood there in a cream-colored silk blouse and pearls, her smile tight and practiced. "Marcus, darling," she said, embracing her son, warmly. Then her eyes shifted to me and the temperature seemed to drop several degrees. "Sarah, how nice to see you again." "Thank you for having me, Mrs. Henderson," I replied, as I always did, maintaining the polite fiction that I was a welcome guest rather than a tolerated inconvenience. The house was exactly as I remembered it, all marble floors, expensive artwork, and rooms that looked like they belonged in a museum rather than a home. Everything was perfect, pristine, and somehow cold despite the warm lighting. It was the kind of house that whispered about money in every corner, from the imported Italian tiles to the crystal chandelier that dominated the foyer. Marcus's extended family was already gathered in the formal dining room. His brother Trevor, a hedge fund manager who'd never met a conversation he couldn't turn into a discussion about his latest investment success. Trevor's wife Jennifer, a former socialite who spent her days planning charity galas and her evenings posting about them on social media. Marcus's Aunt Patricia and Uncle Robert, who owned a chain of luxury hotels and never let anyone forget it. "Sarah," he said quietly, "we need to talk." "Yes," I agreed. "We do. But not here." I looked back at Eleanor Henderson, who was still staring at me like I'd transformed into a completely different person, which, in a way, I suppose I had. "Mrs. Henderson," I said, my voice gentle but firm, "your son is an extraordinary man. He's kind, compassionate, and dedicated to making the world a better place. He chose a career that pays modestly because he wanted to help people, not because he couldn't do anything else. He's worth 100 of the money-obsessed people you probably wish he'd married." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, though whether they were from shame, shock, or anger, I couldn't tell. "And as for that job with your friend Constance," I added, "I appreciate the offer, but I'll have to decline. You see, tomorrow I'm flying to Milan to finalize a partnership with Bulgari, and next week I have meetings in Tokyo with 3 luxury retailers who want exclusive distribution rights for my new collection." The sound of jet engines grew louder outside, and I could see the aircraft positioning itself for takeoff. My pilot was nothing if not perfectly timed. "I should go," I said, picking up my purse. "Marcus, are you coming with me, or would you prefer to stay and process this with your family?" Marcus looked around the table at his relatives, all of whom were still staring at us in various states of shock and disbelief. Then he looked back at me, and I saw something shift in his expression. The hurt was still there, but it was joined by something else, understanding maybe, or perhaps just the recognition that his family had finally shown their true colors in a way he couldn't ignore or excuse. "I'm coming with you," he said, standing and taking my hand. As we walked toward the front door, the silence behind us was broken by the sound of urgent, whispered conversations erupting around the dining room table. I could imagine the frantic discussions that would dominate the rest of their evening, the rehashing of every interaction they'd had with me, the dawning realization of just how badly they'd misjudged the situation. But that was their problem to solve, not mine. Outside, the October air was crisp and clean, a sharp contrast to the suffocating atmosphere we'd just left. My jet sat on the Henderson family's back lawn like a magnificent metal bird, its engines humming with quiet power. The pilot had lowered the stairs, and warm light spilled from the cabin into the darkness. Marcus squeezed my hand as we walked, across the perfectly manicured grass toward the aircraft. "A private jet, Sarah? Really?" "Really," I confirmed, "along with a few other things we need to discuss." "Like the $47 million? "Like the $47 million, I agreed. "Among other things." He was quiet for a moment as we approached the jet. Then he said, "I'm not angry that you have money, Sarah. I'm hurt that you didn't trust me enough to tell me." I stopped walking and turned to face him, seeing the pain in his eyes that I'd been dreading since the day I'd decided to keep my success secret. "Marcus," I said, "I need you to understand something. I've watched money destroy every relationship my mother ever had. I've seen women dismissed as gold diggers, and men accused of using women for their wealth. I wanted to know that what we had was real, that it was based on who we are, rather than what we have." "But don't you think I deserve to know who you really are?" he asked. "Don't you think hiding something this big was a form of lying?" He was right, and I knew it. My motivations had been protective, but the result had been deceptive. I'd robbed him of the chance to know the complete me, and I'd robbed myself of the chance to be fully known and loved. "You're absolutely right," I said, "and I'm sorry. I thought I was protecting us, but what I was really doing was protecting myself. I was scared that if you knew the truth, everything would change. Everything has changed, Marcus said. But maybe that's not entirely a bad thing. He looked back toward the house, where lights blazed in every window and I could see silhouettes moving behind the curtains. His family was undoubtedly having the most interesting dinner conversation of their lives. "They're never going to treat you the same way again," he said. "Good," I replied, "because I'm never going to let anyone treat me that way again." Marcus smiled then, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him all evening. $47 million, he said, shaking his head. "My wife is richer than my entire family combined." "Does that bother you?" "Are you kidding?" he said, his smile widening. "I'm married to a business mogul who just bought a helicopter ride to tell off my obnoxious relatives. I'm pretty sure I hit the jackpot." I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in months. It was pretty dramatic, wasn't it? "It was perfect," Marcus said. "They deserved every second of it." We climbed the stairs into the jet, leaving the Henderson estate behind us. As we settled into the leather seats and the pilot prepared for takeoff, I felt like I was finally able to breathe fully for the first time in 3 years. The truth was out now, for better or worse. Marcus knew who I really was. His family knew what they'd lost, and I knew that I'd never again tolerate being treated as less than I was worth. As the jet lifted off into the night sky, carrying us away from the life we'd been living and toward the one we were about to build together, I realized that this wasn't just about money, or family drama, or even revenge. It was about refusing to shrink myself to fit into other people's expectations. It was about demanding to be seen and valued for who I truly was, and it was about learning that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply tell the truth. The Henderson family had spent 3 years trying to make me feel worthless. Tonight, they'd learned that the only worthless thing in that dining room had been their judgment. The flight to my penthouse apartment in Manhattan took less than 30 minutes, but it felt like we were traveling between 2 different worlds. As the city lights spread out below us like a constellation of possibilities, Marcus and I sat in comfortable silence, both processing the magnitude of what had just happened. When we landed at the private airfield in Teterboro, my driver was waiting with the Bentley. Marcus raised an eyebrow as we settled into the leather seats, but he didn't say anything. There would be time for all the questions later. Right now, we both needed space to think. My penthouse occupied the entire top floor of a building overlooking Central Park. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the city, and the interior was decorated with pieces from my personal art collection, paintings and sculptures I'd acquired not for their investment value, but because they spoke to something deep within me. This was my sanctuary, the place where I could be completely myself without pretense or performance. Marcus walked slowly through the space, taking in details I'd never been able to share with him before. The custom jewelry display cases showcasing pieces from my various collections. The wall of awards and magazine covers featuring my work. The photographs of me with celebrities, world leaders, and business icons who'd become not just clients, but friends. "This is who you really are," he said, stopping in front of a photo of me shaking hands with the president at a White House dinner for female entrepreneurs. "This is part of who I am," I corrected. "The woman you fell in love with is also real. She's just more complete than you knew." Marcus turned to face me, his expression thoughtful. "Sarah, I need to understand something. When you said your business generated $47 million last year, were you talking gross revenue or profit?" "Profit," I said quietly. "Gross revenue was closer to $90 million. He sat down heavily on the Italian leather sofa, running his hands through his hair. "Jesus, Sarah. Do you realize what this means? Do you understand the scope of what you've been hiding?" I sat beside him, careful to maintain some distance. "I know it seems enormous now, but it didn't happen overnight. It was gradual, and at each stage, I told myself I'd reveal everything when the time was right. But the time never felt right, and the secret kept growing. "Show me," Marcus said suddenly. "I want to see everything. I want to understand how my wife became one of the most successful entrepreneurs in the country without me even knowing it." Over the next 3 hours, I walked Marcus through my journey. I showed him the business plans, the financial statements, the patent documents, the international contracts. I explained how that single red carpet moment had transformed everything. How I'd had to make split-second decisions about scaling production, hiring employees, and managing sudden fame. The hardest part wasn't the business growth, I told him as we looked through photos from various industry award ceremonies. It was pretending it wasn't happening. Do you know how many times I wanted to tell you when something incredible happened? When I landed the Cartier partnership, when Vogue did that 12-page spread, when I was invited to speak at the World Economic Forum, I wanted to share every victory with you. Marcus studied a photo of me accepting an award for female Entrepreneur of the Year. "Why didn't you? We're married, Sarah. We're supposed to share everything." "Because I was terrified," I admitted. Various cousins, family friends, and hangers-on who orbited the Henderson wealth like planets around a sun. The dining table was set for 20 people, with china that probably cost more than most people's cars and silverware that gleamed under. The chandelier's light. Everything was arranged with mathematical precision, from the folded napkins to the multiple wine glasses at each place setting. It was beautiful, intimidating, and utterly lacking in warmth. I took my usual seat near the middle of the table, positioned strategically between Marcus and his cousin David, who worked in the family business and had always been polite but distant. Across from me sat Eleanor Henderson, perfectly positioned, to monitor my every move and expression throughout the meal. The conversation flowed predictably. Trevor dominated the discussion with stories about his latest successful trades. Jennifer chimed in with updates about her charity work, and Richard Henderson held court with opinions about the economy and politics. I contributed when spoken to, asked appropriate questions, and tried to make myself as unremarkable as possible. That's when Eleanor Henderson decided to make me the center of attention in the worst possible way. "Sarah, dear," she said, her voice carrying that particular tone that always preceded something unpleasant. "I've been thinking about your situation, and I believe I may have found a solution to your employment challenges." My fork paused halfway to my mouth. "Employment challenges?" "Well, yes, your little hobby business." She waved her hand dismissively. "It's sweet that you enjoy making jewelry, but it's hardly a sustainable career, is it? I spoke with my friend Constance, and she's looking for a personal assistant. The pay is quite good, and it would give you some real work experience, something to put on a proper resume." The table had gone quiet, everyone's attention focused on our exchange. Marcus shifted uncomfortably beside me, and I could feel his tension like a physical presence. "Mom," he said quietly, "Sarah's business is doing well. She doesn't need—" "Oh, Marcus," Eleanor interrupted with a patronizing laugh. "You're such a sweetheart, always trying to protect Sarah's feelings. But we're family here. We can speak honestly." She turned back to me with that razor-sharp smile. "Dear, I know you're doing your best, but let's be realistic. You're 32 years old and you're still playing with beads and wire. At some point, don't you think it's time to consider a more practical approach to life?" The words hit like physical blows, each one carefully chosen to inflict maximum damage. Around the table, I could see various expressions: discomfort, agreement, curiosity about how I'd respond. Richard Henderson nodded approvingly at his wife's intervention. Trevor smirked into his wine glass. Jennifer looked like she was watching an entertaining television show. "I appreciate your concern," I managed to say, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. "But I'm quite happy with my work." "Happy doesn't pay the bills, does it?" Richard Henderson interjected, leaning forward with the confidence of a man who'd never doubted his own authority. Marcus works with disadvantaged children, which is admirable, but hardly lucrative. Someone in this marriage needs to be practical about finances. Someone needs to contribute meaningfully to the household. The implication was clear, that someone wasn't me. That I was a burden, a drain on their son's resources, a woman who was content to let her husband support her while she played at being an artist. "Actually, Dad," Marcus began, his voice tight with controlled anger, "Sarah contributes more than you." "It's fine, Marcus," I said, placing my hand on his arm. But it wasn't fine. Nothing about this was fine. These people had spent 3 years treating me like I was beneath them, and I'd taken it because I'd thought it was the price of loving their son. But there were limits to what anyone should have to endure, and Eleanor Henderson had just crossed mine. "You know what, Mrs. Henderson?" I said, setting down my fork with deliberate precision. "You're absolutely right about one thing. It is time for honesty in this family." Eleanor's eyebrows rose slightly, clearly not expecting me to push back. "Oh? And what honesty is that, dear?" Before I could answer, a sound began to filter through the dining room windows. It was distant at first, barely noticeable over the conversation, but it grew steadily louder, more distinct. The rhythmic thrum of helicopter blades cutting through the evening air. Everyone at the table paused, heads turning toward the windows as the sound intensified. The crystal in the chandelier began to tinkle softly, vibrating with the increasing noise outside. "What on earth is that?" Patricia asked, her voice rising to be heard over the growing din. Richard Henderson stood up, walking to the large window that overlooked the estate's expansive back lawn. His face went pale as he peered outside, his mouth falling open in shock. "There's a helicopter landing on our lawn," he said, his voice barely audible over the noise. "And it's towing something." The sound reached a crescendo as the aircraft touched down, and then gradually diminished as the engines wound down. In the sudden relative quiet that followed, another sound became apparent, the distant whine of jet engines. "That's not just a helicopter," Trevor said, his voice filled with confusion and something that might have been awe. "There's a private jet out there, a big one." All eyes turned to me as I calmly reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I was looking for, then pressed call. "Hello, Captain Martinez?" "Yes, it's Sarah." "Perfect timing. I'll be out in just a moment." I ended the call and looked around the table at 20 faces, staring at me in various states of shock and confusion. Eleanor Henderson's mouth was opening and closing like a fish, no words coming out. Richard Henderson had gone from pale to red, his face flushed with confusion and what looked like the beginning of understanding. "You were asking about honesty," I said, my voice calm and clear in the sudden silence. "So let me be completely honest with you, Mrs. Henderson. My little hobby business, as you call it, generated $47 million in revenue last year. The helicopter outside belongs to my company. The private jet belongs to me personally. I own 3 homes, a portfolio of investments that would make Trevor's hedge fund clients weep with envy, and a business that employs over 200 people across 6 countries." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Eleanor Henderson looked like someone had physically struck her. Her perfectly composed facade had crumbled, replaced by an expression of pure shock. "But you said you made jewelry," she stammered. "I do make jewelry," I replied. "I also run a multi-million-dollar luxury goods company, hold patents on 3 revolutionary jewelry-making techniques, and last month I was featured on the cover of Forbes magazine as one of the top female entrepreneurs under 40. Richard Henderson sank back into his chair, his face now somewhere between red and purple. "But why? Why didn't you say anything?" I stood up slowly, smoothing down my simple black dress, a dress that, I realized, Probably cost more than most people would guess, from a designer whose name these people would definitely recognize, if they knew fashion beyond its price tags. Because I wanted to see who Marcus really was when he thought I had nothing, I said. And he proved to be exactly the man I hoped he was. Kind, loving, and completely uninterested in what I could buy him. He fell in love with who I am, not what I have. I looked around the table, meeting each pair of shocked eyes in turn. But I also wanted to see how long you would all continue to treat me like I was beneath you. How long you would make jokes about my hobby, dismiss my work, and act like I was some kind of burden on your precious son. Eleanor Henderson's hands were shaking as she reached for her wine glass. Sarah, we didn't know. No, you didn't know, I agreed. But more importantly, you didn't ask. In 3 years, not one of you ever showed genuine interest in my work, my goals, or my achievements. You decided I was worth less because I wasn't like you, and you treated me accordingly. The helicopter engines outside began to wind up again, and I could see through the window that my pilot was preparing for departure. My actual transportation was the jet, of course. The helicopter had been pure theater, arranged specifically for this moment. The truth is, I continued, I could have bought and sold most of your businesses twice over by now. But I didn't tell you that because I thought maybe, just maybe, you'd learn to respect me for who I am, rather than what I have. Clearly, I was wrong about that. Marcus stood up beside me, his face a mixture of pride, confusion, and what looked like the beginnings of hurt. He'd clearly had no idea about the extent of my success, and I could see him processing not just the revelation, but the fact that I'd kept it from him. I've seen what money does to relationships. My mother went through 3 marriages to wealthy men who either accused her of gold digging or tried to control her through financial dependence. I watched her lose herself completely in each relationship, becoming whoever she thought they wanted her to be. I picked up another photo, this one from a charity gala where I donated $500,000 to build schools in underdeveloped countries. I wanted to know that you loved me for me, not because I could upgrade your lifestyle or pay off your student loans or buy you things you couldn't afford. I wanted our love to be pure. But by hiding this, you took away my choice, Marcus said gently. You decided for both of us how I would react. You didn't trust me to love you regardless of your wealth. He was right, and hearing him say it out loud made me realize how deeply my fear had influenced my decisions. I was protecting myself, I said. But I was also protecting you from your family's reaction if they knew you'd married someone wealthier than they were. Can you imagine how much worse their behavior would have been if they'd known from the beginning? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, considering this. Actually, they probably would have been fake nice to you, which might have been worse in its own way. Exactly. At least their genuine disdain was honest. If they'd known about the money, I never would have seen their true characters. Speaking of my family, Marcus said, checking his phone, I have 17 missed calls and about 30 text messages. My mother has apparently progressed through the stages of grief and is now firmly in the bargaining phase. He showed me some of the messages. Eleanor Henderson had gone from shock to anger to desperate attempts at damage control. She was demanding to know why I'd deceived the family, begging Marcus to bring me back so she could properly apologize, and making increasingly frantic promises about how differently they'd treat me in the future. She's terrified, I observed. She's realizing that she's been systematically insulting someone who could buy and sell their entire social circle. It's more than that, Marcus said. She's realizing that she misjudged everything. My mother prides herself on being able to assess people, on understanding social hierarchies and power structures. Finding out she's been condescending to someone, more successful than anyone in our family, has shattered her worldview. My phone buzzed with a call from Maya. I put it on speaker so Marcus could listen. Sarah. Oh my God, you actually did it. Maya's voice was filled with excitement and pride. The video is already going viral. Someone at that dinner filmed the helicopter landing and posted it on social media. Private jet revenge is trending on Twitter. Someone filmed it? I asked, feeling a mix of amusement and concern. Trevor's wife, I think. The angle looks like it came from inside the house. The caption says something like, "When you realize you've been insulting a multimillionaire for 3 years." It has over 2 million views already. Marcus and I looked at each other. "Well," he said, "I guess there's no putting this particular genie back in the bottle." Over the next few days, the story exploded across social media platforms. The video of my helicopter arrival became a symbol of karmic justice that resonated with millions of people who'd experienced being underestimated or dismissed. Comments poured in from people sharing their own stories of being judged by appearances, income, or circumstances. But the real impact went beyond social media validation. Within 24 hours, I received calls from 3 major television networks wanting to interview me. Forbes requested a follow-up article. The Harvard Business School invited me to speak at their entrepreneurship symposium. Luxury brands that had never heard of my company were suddenly interested in partnerships. "This is incredible," Maya said during our emergency strategy meeting the next morning. "We're getting partnership inquiries from companies we've been trying to approach for years. That dinner party might have been the best marketing strategy we never planned." But the professional opportunities, while exciting, weren't what mattered most to me. What mattered was the conversation I had with Marcus that evening as we walked through Central Park. "I've been thinking about what happened," he said, "and I realize I owe you an apology too." "You do?" "I should have stood up to my family. Years ago. I should have shut down their comments about your work and their dismissive attitude. I told myself I was keeping the peace, but what I was really doing was enabling their behavior." We stopped beside the reservoir, the city lights, reflecting on the water's surface. "Marcus, you tried to defend me several times, I remember." "Half-heartedly," he said. "I should have been more forceful. I should have made it clear that disrespecting you meant disrespecting me. Instead, I let them treat you badly because it was easier than dealing with family conflict." "We both made mistakes," I said. "But maybe that's not what matters now. What matters is what we do moving forward." "I want to be part of your real life," Marcus said. "Not just the version you thought I could handle, but everything. Your business, your success, your dreams, your challenges. I want to be your partner in all of it. Even if it means dealing with more attention, more scrutiny, more people wanting things from us." "Especially then," he said. "Sarah, do you realize what you've built? You've created jobs for hundreds of people. You've brought beauty into the world through your designs. You've donated millions to charity. You've proven that creative passion and business success aren't mutually exclusive. I'm not intimidated by your success. I'm inspired by it." That night, we made a decision that would change everything. We would stop hiding. We would embrace the full truth of who we were, individually, and as a couple. We would use the platform that the viral video had given us to tell our story properly, to inspire others who felt caught between authenticity and acceptance. 3 days later, we sat down for an interview with 60 Minutes. The segment, which aired the following Sunday, became one of their most watched episodes of the year. We talked about the complexity of money and relationships, the challenge of staying authentic while building success, and the importance of standing up for your worth. "The hardest part wasn't building the business," I told the interviewer. "It was learning to believe I deserved the success I was creating. I grew up middle class, and there's this voice in your head that says you're getting above yourself, that you should be grateful for what you have and not reach for more." "But you did reach for more," the interviewer prompted. "I did, and I learned that ambition isn't selfish if you use your success to lift others up. Every employee I hire, every artisan I work with, every charity I support, that's what success is really about. It's not about proving you're better than anyone else. It's about becoming the best version of yourself and using that to make the world a little better. Marcus spoke about the importance of supporting your partner's dreams, even when they're bigger than you imagined. I thought I was being supportive by accepting Sarah as she was, he said. But real support means encouraging someone to become everything they're capable of being, even if that means they outgrow the box you initially put them in. The response to the interview was overwhelming. I received thousands of messages from women who'd been hiding their success, from entrepreneurs struggling with imposter syndrome, from people who'd been underestimated and dismissed by those who should have supported them. One message particularly moved me. It was from a young woman named Jessica who'd started a tech company while working as a waitress to support her family. Her boyfriend's parents had been pressuring her to get a real job and stop wasting time on computers. After seeing our story, she'd finally told them about her company's recent acquisition by a major tech firm for 8 figures. "You showed me that I didn't have to shrink myself to make other people comfortable," she wrote. "Your story gave me the courage to stand in my truth." That's when I realized the real power of what had happened that night at the Henderson family dinner. It wasn't about revenge or proving anyone wrong. It was about refusing to accept other people's limitations on our potential. It was about demanding to be seen fully, completely, authentically. 6 months later, I established the Sarah Marcus Foundation, named for both Marcus and myself, focused on supporting underestimated entrepreneurs. We provide funding, mentorship, and resources to people whose potential has been overlooked by traditional investors, particularly women, minorities, and people from working-class backgrounds who are building businesses in non-traditional ways. Marcus left his job at the youth center to become the foundation's director. "I thought I was making a difference working with 20 kids at a time," he told me. "But through the foundation, we can impact thousands of lives." The Henderson family situation resolved itself in unexpected ways. Eleanor Henderson, after several weeks of what Marcus described as intensive soul-searching, reached out to request a private meeting. She came to our penthouse alone, without her usual armor of designer clothes and perfect composure. "I need you to know that I'm ashamed of how I treated you," she said, tears in her eyes. "I realize now that I wasn't just wrong about your financial situation. I was wrong about who you are as a person. You've been nothing but gracious and kind to our family, and we responded with cruelty and condescension." "Mrs. Henderson," I said gently, "I appreciate your apology, but I need you to understand that this isn't just about how you treated me. It's about the values you taught your children and grandchildren. It's about the message you send when you judge people by their bank accounts rather than their character." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "Richard and I have been talking a lot about this. We've realized that we raised our children to value the wrong things. We taught them that worth was measured in dollars, that success was the only thing that mattered. We never taught them to value kindness, creativity, or authenticity." "It's not too late to change," Marcus said, "but the change has to be real, not just because you found out Sarah has money." Eleanor looked at both of us with something I'd never seen in her eyes before, genuine respect. "Would you be willing to give us another chance? Not to go back to how things were, but to build something better?" We agreed to try, with clear boundaries and expectations. The monthly family dinners became quarterly gatherings with new ground rules. No discussions of money unless someone specifically asked for advice. No judgments about career choices, and no tolerance for comments designed to make anyone feel small. The transformation wasn't instant or complete, but it was real. Richard Henderson started asking genuine questions about my business and actually listening to the answers. Trevor began seeking my advice for his own investment strategies. Jennifer started following the foundation's work and eventually became one of our major donors. But the most important change was in Marcus and me. We learned that authenticity requires courage. The courage to be fully yourself even when that makes others uncomfortable. The courage to demand the respect you deserve. And the courage to use your success as a platform for lifting others up. Looking back, I realized that night at the Henderson family dinner was never really about proving them wrong. It was about proving to myself that I had the right to take up space in the world, that my success was valid and valuable, and that I didn't need anyone's permission to be extraordinary. The private jet landing wasn't just a dramatic gesture. It was a declaration of independence from other people's expectations and limitations. It was me finally saying, "This is who I am. This is what I've built. This is the space I occupy in the world, and I'm not apologizing for it anymore." And that, more than any business success or financial milestone, was the moment I truly became free. A year after the Henderson family dinner, my life had transformed in ways I never could have anticipated. The viral video had opened doors I didn't even know existed. But more importantly, it had opened something within me. A confidence and authenticity that I'd been suppressing for far too long. The Sarah Marcus Foundation had become more than just a philanthropic venture. It had become a movement. Our first cohort of entrepreneurs included a single mother who'd developed a revolutionary water purification system in her garage, a former gang member who'd created a program teaching coding to at-risk youth, and a refugee who'd built a successful catering business specializing in fusion cuisine that celebrated her multicultural background. "You realize what you've done, don't you?" said Dr. Angela Martinez, the Harvard Business School professor who'd become our academic advisor. We were sitting in my office, reviewing applications for our second round of funding. "You've created a new model for venture capital, one that values human potential over traditional metrics." I looked out the window at the Manhattan skyline, thinking about how dramatically my perspective had shifted. I spent so many years trying to fit into existing systems, trying to prove I belonged in rooms where people looked at me skeptically. Now I'm creating new rooms, new tables, new conversations. "And it's working," Dr. Martinez said, holding up a folder thick with applications. "We have over 3,000 applicants for 50 spots. These are people who've been turned down by traditional investors, told their ideas weren't viable, dismissed because they didn't fit the typical entrepreneur profile." One application caught my attention immediately. It was from a woman named Lisa Chen, a former factory worker who'd invented a series of ergonomic tools that could prevent repetitive stress injuries in manufacturing jobs. Her background was in assembly line work, not engineering, but her innovations had the potential to transform workplace safety across entire industries. Traditional investors probably looked at her resume and saw someone without formal training, I said, reading through her detailed proposal. But what I see is someone who understands the problem from the inside out, someone who's lived the experience she's trying to solve. This became our foundation's core philosophy, that the best solutions often come from people who've personally experienced the problems they're addressing. We funded the homeless veteran who'd designed portable shelters because he understood what it meant to sleep rough in winter. We supported the dyslexic entrepreneur who'd created learning software because traditional education had failed her. We invested in the former addict who'd developed a revolutionary approach to recovery because he knew firsthand what didn't work in existing programs. Each success story reinforced my belief that potential exists everywhere, but opportunity is often limited by narrow definitions of what an entrepreneur should look like or where good ideas should come from. Marcus threw himself into the foundation work with a passion that reminded me why I'd fallen in love with him in the first place. His background in social work gave him insights into the human side of entrepreneurship that my business experience sometimes missed. "It's not just about funding," he explained to a group of MBA students who'd come to volunteer with our mentorship program. "Most of our entrepreneurs are dealing with systemic barriers that go far beyond access to capital. They're fighting imposter syndrome, navigating family pressure, overcoming educational gaps, dealing with discrimination. Our job is to provide holistic support that addresses all of these challenges. One of our most successful investments was a young man named David Rodriguez, who'd grown up in foster care and aged out of the system at 18. He'd developed a mobile app that connected foster children with resources and support networks, but no traditional investor would take him seriously because he lacked a college degree and had no business experience. They kept asking me about my 5-year business plan, David told me during one of our monthly check-ins. But when you've never had a stable home, thinking 5 years ahead feels impossible. I was just focused on solving a problem that was ruining kids' lives every day. Within 18 months, David's app had been adopted by child services departments in 12 states. Major foundations were funding expansion programs, and tech companies were offering him partnerships. But what mattered most to him wasn't the sad business success. It was the messages he received from foster kids who felt less alone because of what he'd built. "This is what success really looks like," I told Marcus one evening as we read through testimonials from David's app users. "It's not about the money or the recognition. It's about the ripple effects, the lives touched, the problems solved." Marcus nodded, showing me his phone. Speaking of ripple effects, look at this. He'd received a message from Jessica, the young woman who'd written to us after our 60 Minutes interview. She'd used the money from her tech company acquisition to start her own investment fund, specifically focused on supporting women in technology. She was calling it the Sarah Marcus model, looking beyond traditional qualifications to find extraordinary potential. "We're not just changing individual lives," Marcus said. "We're changing how people think about investment, about entrepreneurship, about who deserves a chance to succeed." This realization led to our next major initiative, the Authenticity Project. We began documenting the stories of underestimated entrepreneurs, creating a multimedia platform that showcased their journeys from rejection to success. Each story was designed to inspire others who might be hiding their potential, afraid to take risks, or accepting other people's limitations on their dreams. The project launched with a documentary series that premiered at the Sundance Film Festival. The first episode featured Lisa Chen, the former factory worker whose ergonomic tools had now been adopted by manufacturing companies worldwide. Watching her story unfold on screen, from her years on assembly lines to her breakthrough invention to her current success as a CEO, was profoundly moving. "I used to think my experience as a factory worker was something to be ashamed of," Lisa said in the documentary. "I thought it made me less qualified to be an entrepreneur. Now I realize it was my greatest qualification. I understood the problem in a way that no MBA could teach." The documentary series sparked conversations about class, education, and opportunity that reached far beyond the business world. Universities began incorporating our entrepreneurs' stories into their curricula. High schools started using the series to teach students that success could take many different forms. Community organizations used the episodes to inspire local changemakers. But perhaps the most meaningful impact came from unexpected places. I received a letter from a middle school teacher in rural Oklahoma who'd shown Lisa Chen's episode to her students. Several of them had parents who worked in manufacturing, and they'd never seen their family's experiences portrayed as valuable knowledge rather than just manual labor. "One of my students told me she wants to be an inventor now," the teacher wrote. She said if Lisa could use her factory experience to create something important, maybe she could use her farm experience to solve agricultural problems. "You've helped these kids see their backgrounds as strengths rather than limitations." This was the kind of impact I'd never anticipated when I first started hiding my success from Marcus's family. What had begun as a personal struggle with authenticity had evolved into a movement that was changing how society thought about potential and worth. The success of the Authenticity Project attracted attention from major corporations who wanted to partner with us. Google invited me to speak at their Diversity and Inclusion Summit. McKinsey & Company asked us to consult on their hiring practices. The World Bank requested a presentation on innovative approaches to economic development. Each opportunity was a chance to amplify our message, that the best ideas often come from unexpected places, that traditional credentials don't always predict success, and that investing in overlooked talent isn't just socially responsible, it's smart business. During my presentation to the World Bank, I shared data from our foundation's investments. Our entrepreneurs were succeeding at rates that exceeded traditional venture capital returns, but more importantly, they were creating solutions to problems that established businesses had overlooked or ignored. When you only invest in people who look like previous successful entrepreneurs, I told the audience of development economists and policymakers, you get incremental improvements to existing solutions. When you invest in people with different backgrounds and perspectives, you get breakthrough innovations that can transform entire industries. The presentation led to a partnership with the World Bank to create microfunding programs in developing countries, using our model of investing in local problem solvers rather than importing solutions from elsewhere. But success also brought new challenges. As our foundation grew and our influence expanded, I found myself navigating a complex landscape of expectations and pressures. Some critics accused us of being too selective, of creating a new form of elitism, even as we claimed to challenge existing hierarchies. Others questioned whether our approach was scalable, whether we could maintain our personalized support model as we grew. The criticism stung, partly because some of it was valid. We were being selective. We had to be, given our resources. And maintaining deep relationships with hundreds of entrepreneurs was becoming logistically challenging as our reach expanded. Maybe we need to think differently about scale, Marcus suggested during one of our strategy sessions. Instead of trying to directly support more entrepreneurs, maybe we focus on training other organizations to use our approach. This insight led to the creation of the Marcus Method, a training program for investors, accelerators, and business schools. We began teaching others how to identify potential in unconventional places, how to provide holistic support to entrepreneurs facing systemic barriers, and how to measure success in ways that went beyond financial returns. The first Marcus Method certification program attracted participants from around the world. Investment firms sent their scouts to learn how to spot overlooked talent. Business schools sent professors to understand how to teach entrepreneurship to students from diverse backgrounds. Government agencies sent economic development specialists to learn how to support local innovation. You've created something that's bigger than any single foundation could be, said James Harrison, a venture capitalist who'd initially been skeptical of our approach, but had become one of our strongest advocates after seeing our results. You've changed how the entire industry thinks about investment and potential. The personal transformation was equally significant. Marcus and I had learned to navigate our relationship with complete transparency about money, success, and ambition. We'd established new traditions that reflected our values, like our monthly authenticity dates, where we each shared something we'd been hiding or suppressing, ensuring we never again let secrets build barriers between us. Our relationship with the Henderson family had also evolved in meaningful ways. The quarterly family gatherings had become genuinely enjoyable occasions where conversations focused on substance rather than status. Eleanor Henderson had joined our foundation's board and brought a level of strategic thinking that strengthened our operations significantly. I spent so many years focused on appearances, she told me during one of our planning meetings. I thought success meant making other people think you were better than them. Now I understand that real success means making other people believe they can be better than they thought possible. Richard Henderson had become one of our major donors. But more than that, he'd started mentoring some of our entrepreneurs who were scaling manufacturing businesses. His decades of industrial experience, combined with his newfound understanding of diverse perspectives, made him unexpectedly effective at helping innovative companies navigate operational challenges. The most surprising development was Trevor's transformation. After watching our documentary series, He'd approached me about using his hedge fund expertise to create investment vehicles that could channel more capital toward underestimated entrepreneurs. He was working on developing impact measurement tools that could help traditional investors understand the value of investing in unconventional talent. "I used to think success was about being smarter than everyone else," he admitted during a family dinner. "Now I realize it's about recognizing that intelligence and potential show up in ways I never learned to see." But perhaps the most meaningful validation came from an unexpected source. 3 years after the helicopter incident, I received an invitation to speak at the annual gathering of the American Association of Family Wealth Advisors, an organization that served families like the Hendersons, old money dynasties navigating questions about legacy and purpose. The theme of the conference was redefining success for the next generation, and they wanted me to address how established families could better support innovation and entrepreneurship in their communities. Standing at the podium, looking out at an audience of people who represented the kind of wealth and privilege I'd once felt excluded from, I reflected on how much had changed since that night when I'd felt so small and diminished at the Henderson family table. 3 years ago, I was sitting at a family dinner being told I was worthless, I began. The people saying this weren't malicious. They were operating from a worldview that equated worth with traditional measures of success. They couldn't see value in what didn't fit their familiar patterns. I paused, seeing nods of recognition in the audience. These were people who understood family dynamics, who knew how wealth could create blindness to other forms of value. But here's what I learned from that experience. When people can't see your worth, the problem isn't with you, it's with their vision. And rather than spending energy trying to convince them to see you differently, you're better off focusing that energy on building something so undeniable that it changes how everyone thinks about value itself. The response was overwhelmingly positive, but more importantly, it led to concrete action. Several families in the audience committed to funding entrepreneur support programs in their communities. Others began restructuring their charitable giving to focus on backing unconventional innovators rather than just established institutions. One conversation particularly moved me. An elderly woman approached me after my presentation, introducing herself as Margaret Whitfield, matriarch of a banking dynasty that went back 5 generations. "My granddaughter has been trying to convince our family to invest in what she calls social entrepreneurs," Margaret said. "We've been resistant because these investments don't fit our traditional criteria. After hearing your story, I realize we've been asking the wrong questions. Instead of asking whether these entrepreneurs fit our model of success, we should be asking whether our model of success is big enough to recognize their potential." 6 months later, the Whitfield Family Foundation announced a $100 million fund dedicated to supporting entrepreneurs who were addressing social and environmental challenges in innovative ways. Margaret served as the fund's chair, and she frequently cited our conversation as the catalyst for this new direction. These ripple effects continued to amaze me. Every speech I gave, every interview I conducted, every story we shared through the Authenticity Project seemed to inspire others to question their assumptions about potential and worth. We were part of a larger cultural shift toward recognizing that innovation and leadership could emerge from anywhere, that the next breakthrough might come from the person everyone least expected. But success also brought scrutiny and pressure that I hadn't anticipated. Forbes featured me on their cover as one of the disruptors reshaping American business. Time magazine included me in their list of the 100 most influential people. Harvard offered me an honorary doctorate. While these recognitions were gratifying, they also created new expectations and responsibilities. Suddenly, my opinions were sought on topics far beyond entrepreneurship and investment. People wanted my thoughts on education policy, economic inequality, social justice, and dozens of other complex issues. "You've become a symbol," Maya observed during one of our strategy meetings. "That's powerful, but it's also dangerous. Symbols can't make mistakes. They can't be human. They have to be perfect representations of whatever people need them to represent. She was right, and I could feel the weight of these expectations changing how I moved through the world. I was more careful about what I said publicly, more conscious of how my actions might be interpreted, more aware that my mistakes would be scrutinized more harshly than those of people who hadn't chosen to be public advocates for change. But I also realized that this platform came with an obligation to use it responsibly. If people were going to listen to what I had to say, I needed to make sure I was saying things worth hearing. This led to my decision to write a book about the journey from that humiliating family dinner to building a movement around authentic success. The Authenticity Advantage became a bestseller, but more importantly, it became a handbook for people who felt trapped between who they were and who they thought they needed to be to succeed. The book tour took me to cities across the country, where I met thousands of people who shared their own stories of being underestimated, dismissed, or pressured to hide their true selves. A college student in Detroit told me about suppressing her artistic ambitions because her family expected her to pursue medicine. A software engineer in Austin described how he'd been pretending to be less capable than he was because his colleagues found intelligence threatening. A restaurant owner in Portland explained how she'd been downplaying her business success because her friends made her feel guilty about earning more than they did. Each conversation reinforced my belief that authenticity wasn't just a personal choice. It was a revolutionary act in a world that often demanded conformity and pretense. The book's success led to opportunities I'd never imagined. Universities began developing courses around authentic leadership. Corporations started implementing authenticity assessments in their hiring processes. Business schools began requiring students to examine their own assumptions about success and potential. But the impact that mattered most to me came from individual readers who wrote to tell me how the book had changed their lives. A woman in Ohio had finally told her family about her successful freelance writing business instead of pretending she was just dabbling. A man in Texas had stopped hiding his programming skills from his blue-collar friends and had started a successful tech consulting company. A teenager in California had decided to pursue her dream of becoming a marine biologist despite her family's pressure to choose a more practical career. These letters reminded me that behind all the media, attention, and business success was a simple truth. Everyone deserves to be seen fully, valued completely, and supported in becoming the best version of themselves. That night at the Henderson family dinner, when I'd been made to feel small and worthless, I'd learned that other people's limitations don't have to become your reality. The helicopter landing hadn't just been about making a dramatic point, it had been about refusing to accept anyone else's definition of my worth. And that refusal had grown into something much larger than personal vindication. It had become a movement toward a world where potential is recognized wherever it exists, where innovation is valued regardless of its source, and where success is measured not just by what you achieve, but by how many others you lift up along the way. 5 years had passed since that transformative evening at the Henderson estate, and the world looked remarkably different through my eyes. What had begun as a moment of personal vindication had evolved into something I never could have imagined. A global network of changemakers who were rewriting the rules of success, one authentic story at a time. The morning of my 41st birthday brought news that would have seemed impossible during those early days of hiding my achievements. The Nobel Peace Prize Committee had announced that the Sarah Marcus Foundation was being considered for nomination, recognizing our work in fostering economic empowerment and social innovation among marginalized communities worldwide. While the nomination itself was an honor beyond measure, what truly moved me was the letter from the committee explaining their decision. Your foundation has demonstrated that investing in overlooked human potential is not merely charitable work, but a pathway to solving some of humanity's most pressing challenges. The letter read, "By recognizing worth where others see only limitation, you have created a model for economic development that prioritizes human dignity alongside financial returns." I sat in my office, reading these words as the sun rose over Manhattan, thinking about the journey that had brought us to this moment. The shy woman who had once flinched when people asked about her work was now being recognized on the world's largest stage for championing the dreams of others. Marcus found me there an hour later, tears streaming down my face as I held the letter. "Are you okay?" he asked, settling beside me on the window seat that had become our favorite spot for important conversations. "I keep thinking about everyone who told me I was dreaming too big," I said. "My high school guidance counselor who said art wasn't a real career. On the bank loan officer who laughed when I explained my business plan. Your mother." I paused, smiling through my tears. Even myself, for all those years when I believed that playing small was safer than risking failure. Marcus took my hand, his thumb tracing the simple wedding band I'd never upgraded despite our wealth. "You know what I love most about this," he said. "It's not that you proved them wrong. It's that you helped them see they were asking the wrong questions entirely." This insight had become the cornerstone of our work. We'd learned that the problem wasn't convincing traditional gatekeepers to recognize unconventional talent. It was creating entirely new systems that operated on different principles. The entrepreneurs we supported weren't trying to fit into existing industries. They were creating new ones. They weren't seeking approval from established authorities. They were becoming the authorities themselves. Our latest initiative, the Global Authenticity Summit, had grown from a small gathering of 50 entrepreneurs to an international conference attracting thousands of participants from 6 continents. This year's theme was Beyond Barriers, Creating Tomorrow's Solutions Today, and the speaker lineup represented the kind of diversity that would have been unimaginable at traditional business conferences. Dr. Amara Okafor, a former refugee from Bas, Nigeria who'd developed revolutionary water purification technology using materials available in refugee camps, would be presenting alongside Maria Gonzalez, a grandmother from rural Mexico whose organic farming innovations were being adopted by agricultural departments across Latin America. James Littlebear, a member of the Lakota Nation whose renewable energy company was transforming how tribal communities approached energy independence, was scheduled to speak on the same panel as Chen Wei, a former textile worker whose sustainable fashion company had disrupted the fast fashion industry. Each of these entrepreneurs represented something profound. The idea that the best solutions to complex problems often come from the people who've lived those problems most intimately. Traditional investors had initially overlooked all of them, but their innovations were now reshaping entire industries. "The beautiful thing about this conference," Maya observed as we reviewed the final program, "is that none of these speakers would have been invited to share their expertise 5 years ago. They didn't have the right credentials, the right backgrounds, the right connections. Now they're the ones teaching Harvard professors and Fortune 500 CEOs how to think about innovation." The summit had become more than just a conference. It was a demonstration of what became possible when you stopped asking whether someone fit existing definitions of success and started asking what new definitions of success they might create. But perhaps the most meaningful aspect of our work was its impact on the next generation. We'd established the Young Authenticity Program, providing mentorship and funding to entrepreneurs under 25 who were challenging conventional wisdom about age and experience. One of our youngest recipients was a 16-year-old named Alex Chen, no relation to our manufacturing innovator Lisa Chen, who'd developed an app that helped teenagers experiencing homelessness connect with resources and safe spaces. Traditional investors had dismissed the project as too niche and questioned whether someone so young could understand the complexities of social services. "They kept telling me I needed more life experience," Alex told me during our monthly mentorship call. "But I had the most important life experience. I'd been homeless. I knew what it felt like to be invisible, to have adults talk about your problems without ever asking what you actually needed." Within 2 years, Alex's app had been adopted by social service agencies in 37 states. Major tech companies were studying the platform's design to understand how to create more intuitive interfaces for vulnerable populations. Most importantly, thousands of young people were finding help they might never have accessed otherwise. "This is what disruption really looks like," I told a group of traditional venture capitalists who'd come to learn about our methods. "It's not about making existing systems more efficient. It's about questioning whether existing systems are serving the people they claim to help." The venture capitalists had initially come to our presentation with skepticism, but by the end of the session, several were asking how they could restructure their own investment criteria to identify potential beyond conventional metrics. One of them, a partner at a prestigious Silicon Valley firm, approached me afterward with a confession that would have shocked his colleagues. "I've been in this business for 20 years, he said, "and I realize I've been making the same basics mistake over and over. I've been investing in people who remind me of previous successes, which means I've been funding variations on the same themes rather than truly innovative solutions." This conversation led to an unexpected partnership. His firm agreed to pilot a program where half of their investment decisions would be made using our evaluation criteria, focusing on the depth of problem understanding rather than traditional qualifications. The results were remarkable. Their unconventional investments were outperforming their traditional ones by 30%. But success metrics went beyond financial returns. The entrepreneurs they'd supported using our approach were creating solutions to problems that hadn't even been on traditional investors' radar. A former prison inmate had developed a job training program that was reducing recidivism rates by 60%. A woman with autism had created communication tools that were transforming how schools worked with neurodivergent children. A former addict had designed a recovery program that was being adopted by treatment centers nationwide. "I'm starting to think we've been fundamentally wrong about risk assessment," the venture capitalist told me 6 months later. "We thought unconventional backgrounds represented higher risk, but it turns out they often represent better market understanding and more innovative approaches to problem solving." This shift in thinking was spreading throughout the investment community. Business schools were revising their curricula to include courses on unconventional market analysis. Major corporations were restructuring their innovation labs to include perspectives from employees with non-traditional backgrounds. Government agencies were consulting with our entrepreneurs to understand how policy could better support grassroots innovation. The transformation wasn't limited to business and entrepreneurship. Our work had inspired similar approaches in education, healthcare, and social services. Universities were creating scholarship programs specifically for students whose potential had been overlooked by traditional metrics. Hospitals were hiring community health workers whose personal experiences with illness gave them unique insights into patient needs. Social service agencies were promoting formerly homeless individuals to leadership positions, recognizing that lived experience was often more valuable than advanced degrees. Each success story reinforced our core belief that potential exists everywhere, but opportunity is often rationed based on outdated assumptions about who deserves a chance to succeed. This philosophy had also transformed my relationship with traditional markers of success. When Fortune magazine named me CEO of the Year, I used my acceptance speech to highlight 5 entrepreneurs who'd been rejected by traditional investors before finding support through our foundation. When the White House invited me to serve on an economic advisory committee, I insisted that half the committee members be people who'd built successful businesses without college degrees. "You're using your platform to platforming others," observed Dr. Martinez during one of our quarterly reviews. "That's leadership in its truest form." But perhaps the most profound change was in my understanding of what legacy meant. I'd initially thought success was about building something that would outlast me, a company, a foundation, a body of work. Now I realized that true legacy was about changing how people thought about success itself. This shift crystallized during a conversation with my 20-year-old nephew, Marcus's brother Trevor's son, who was struggling with choosing a college major. He'd been accepted to several prestigious business schools, but his passion was sustainable agriculture, a field his parents considered impractical. Everyone keeps telling me I need to think about my future, he said during a family dinner. But when I look at what you've built, Aunt Sarah, it seems like the future belongs to people who care more about solving problems than following predetermined paths. His comment sparked a family discussion that would have been impossible during those early years of tension and misunderstanding. Eleanor Henderson, now in her 70s, shared stories about dreams she'd abandoned because they didn't fit her family's expectations. Richard Henderson admitted that he'd always wanted to be a teacher, but had felt pressured to join the family business instead. I spent my whole life following other people's definitions of success, Eleanor said, her voice thick with emotion. I taught my children to do the same thing, but watching Sarah's journey has made me understand that the bravest thing you can do is create your own definition of what a successful life looks like. This conversation led to a new Henderson family tradition, an annual Dreams and Courage dinner, where family members shared something they wanted to pursue but had been afraid to attempt. Over the past 3 years, these gatherings had inspired remarkable transformations. Trevor had started a nonprofit focused on financial literacy in underserved communities. Jennifer had launched a sustainable fashion line that was gaining national attention. Several younger family members had changed majors, started businesses, or pursued creative projects they'd previously considered unrealistic. You didn't. Just change how we saw you, Eleanor told me privately after one of these dinners. You changed how we saw ourselves and what we thought was possible. This personal transformation reflected something happening on a much larger scale. The authenticity movement we'd helped start was reshaping conversations about success, potential, and worth across multiple sectors of society. But with this influence came new responsibilities and challenges I hadn't anticipated. The success of our work had attracted attention from political figures who wanted to associate themselves with our message without necessarily understanding its deeper implications. Corporate executives were using authenticity as a buzzword while maintaining hiring and promotion practices that perpetuated existing inequalities. Some organizations were creating superficial diversity programs rather than examining the systemic barriers that limited opportunities for underrepresented groups. We need to be careful about co-optation, Maya warned during one of our strategy sessions. When powerful people start using your language, it doesn't necessarily mean they've adopted your values. This insight led us to develop the Authenticity Certification Program, a rigorous process for organizations that wanted to demonstrate genuine commitment to recognizing and developing unconventional talent. The certification required companies to show measurable changes in their hiring, promotion, and investment practices, not just their public messaging. The certification process quickly became the gold standard for organizations serious about meaningful change. Companies that achieved certification saw significant improvements in innovation, employee satisfaction, and financial performance. More importantly, they became pipelines for the kind of talent that traditional systems had been overlooking. But the real validation of our work came from unexpected sources. A study by the National Academy of Sciences found that industries with higher percentages of authentically diverse leadership, meaning diversity that included people with non-traditional backgrounds and unconventional paths to success, were more innovative, more resilient, and better at anticipating and solving complex problems. What you've done, explained Dr. Patricia Williams, the economist who'd led the study, is demonstrate that diversity isn't just about fairness or social responsibility. It's about competitive advantage. Organizations that can recognize potential wherever it exists have access to a much larger talent pool and a much broader range of solutions. This research gave us powerful ammunition for conversations with skeptical institutions. We were no longer asking organizations to invest in unconventional talent as an act of charity. We were showing them that failing to do so was a strategic disadvantage. The global reach of our impact became clear during a trip to Kenya, where we were exploring partnerships with local entrepreneurship programs. I met with Grace Wanjiku, a woman who'd built a successful agricultural technology company after being rejected by multiple microfinance programs because she lacked formal education. "Your story reached us even here," Grace told me as we toured her facility where she was developing drought-resistant farming techniques. "When we heard about the American woman who proved her worth with a helicopter, it gave us courage to prove our own worth with results instead of credentials." Grace's company was now working with farming communities across East Africa, helping small-scale farmers increase their yields while adapting to climate change. Her innovations were being studied by agricultural researchers at universities that had once dismissed her because she'd learned farming from her grandmother rather than from textbooks. "The beautiful thing about what you started," Grace continued, "is that it's giving people permission to value their own knowledge and experiences. For too long, we've been taught that if we didn't learn something in a classroom, it wasn't real knowledge. Now people are understanding that lived experience is often the most valuable education of all." This conversation reminded me of why we'd started this work in the first place. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong or seeking revenge for past slights. It was about creating a world where potential was recognized and nurtured wherever it existed, where success was measured not just by what you achieved, but by how many others you helped achieve their own dreams. As I prepared for my keynote address, at this year's Global Authenticity Summit, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this point. The woman who'd once hidden her success to avoid making others uncomfortable had learned to use that success as a platform for amplifying voices that might otherwise go unheard. The speech I'd prepared focused on the theme of radical authenticity, the idea that being genuinely yourself in a world that rewards conformity is both a personal choice and a political act. But as I stood before an audience of 3,000 entrepreneurs, investors, educators, and changemakers from around the world, I realized that the most important message wasn't about authenticity at all. It was about courage. 5 years ago, I began, I was sitting at a family dinner being told I was worthless by people who couldn't see past their own assumptions about what success looked like. Tonight, I'm standing before you as someone who's learned that other people's limitations don't have to become your reality. I paused, looking out at faces that represented every continent, every background, every possible path to innovation and success. But here's what I want you to understand. The helicopter that landed on that lawn wasn't just making a point about hidden wealth. It was making a point about hidden potential. Every single person in this room represents potential that someone, somewhere, failed to recognize. Every innovation you've created, every problem you've solved, every life you've touched. It all started with your refusal to accept someone else's assessment of your worth. The audience was completely silent, but I could feel the energy in the room building as people connected with the message on a personal level. The world is full of people who are waiting for permission to be extraordinary. They're waiting for someone with credentials to validate their ideas, someone with authority to give them a chance, someone with power to recognize their potential. But here's what we've learned. You don't need anyone's permission to be who you're meant to be. You don't need anyone's approval to pursue what matters to you. You don't need anyone's validation to know your own worth. The applause that followed was thunderous, but more importantly, I could see in people's faces that the message was landing. These weren't just words of encouragement. This was a call to action. The future doesn't belong to people with perfect resumes or traditional qualifications, I continued when the applause died down. It belongs to people who understand problems deeply enough to create solutions that others can't imagine. It belongs to people who care more about impact than status, more about substance than style, more about lifting others up than climbing over them. I looked out at the audience, seeing entrepreneurs who'd been homeless, executives who'd started as janitors, innovators who'd been told they weren't smart enough, creators who'd been dismissed as dreamers. Every single one of you is proof that potential exists in places where society doesn't think to look for it. Every success story in this room is evidence that the best solutions often come from the most unexpected sources. Every achievement you've accomplished is a reminder that worth isn't determined by where you come from, but by where you choose to go. The standing ovation that followed lasted for several minutes, but as I stood on that stage, I wasn't thinking about applause or recognition. I was thinking about a shy woman who'd once believed that playing small was safer than risking failure. I was thinking about all the dreams that never get pursued because someone convinces us they're not practical. I was thinking about all the potential that goes unrealized because people learn to see themselves through other people's limiting perspectives. But mostly, I was thinking about the future we were building together. A future where authenticity wasn't just celebrated but expected, where diversity of thought and experience was recognized as essential for innovation, where success was measured not just by what you accumulated, but by what you contributed. That helicopter landing had been about more than proving a point or getting revenge. It had been about refusing to accept anyone else's limitations on what was possible. And 5 years later, that refusal had grown into a movement that was changing how the world thought about potential, success, and worth. The most powerful thing you can do isn't to prove other people wrong. It's to prove to yourself that you're capable of more than anyone, including yourself, ever imagined. It's to recognize that your background isn't a limitation. It's a source of unique insight. It's to understand that your struggles aren't weaknesses. They're preparation for the problems you're meant to solve. When people can't see your worth, don't waste time trying to convince them. Instead, focus that energy on building something so meaningful, so impactful, so undeniably valuable that it changes how everyone thinks about worth itself. That's the real power of authenticity. It's not about being accepted by systems that were never designed to include you. It's about creating new systems that work for everyone who's ever been told they don't belong. And that's a legacy worth building. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.